Welcome, everybody, to episode 34 of Practical Psychology Podcast. My name is Joseph Wong. I'm one of the co hosts. Today, we are very happy to have Stacey. Stacey is joining us as the registered psychotherapist today to talk about parenting coaching. Stacey is very passionate about psychotherapy. She's located in Toronto. And thank you, Stacey.
Thank you, Joseph, for having me. As of right now, I am currently providing psychotherapy services for a multitude of clinics. One of them really focuses on working with the neurodivergent population, kids ages 6 and up. Some of those services include individual and group therapy. However, we're here to discuss a particularly interesting service, which, as Joseph mentioned, is parent coaching.
Stacey,
One,
we are very excited here because people seeking counseling for children, teenager is a big need, not just to resolve problem, but also to enhance their quality in their education and all that. And a lot of people kind of forget about their parenting coaching because the parents are the leaders in here.
absolutely. I didn't really think much about it or how helpful it would be to parents until I started doing it and seeing such amazing results from my families and my kids that I work with. I think a big question that a lot of people, even just listening today, might have is what exactly is parent coaching? And the way that I try to describe it is it's more of an opportunity for parents, caregivers to ask questions or learn new strategies or skills to be able to help support their children at home. And there are tons and tons of different circumstances that would warrant parent coaching. Um, I have parent coaching for clients who I see for therapy, like my little kiddos, I see their parents for parent coaching. And then I have parent coaching for kids who might not be eligible for therapy. For example, they are nonverbal or have very low verbal skills, or they just don't want to come to therapy. Um, so yeah, it's very interesting to see who comes, but I've seen a really big benefit to everybody.
That's excellent here, Stacey. Because a lot of times when the parents bring their child to therapy, they sort of just, Stacy, this is my child. I'm gonna come back in 2 hours. That sort of thing, and kind of like fix my child or teach skills. And they clearly don't have this parenting coaching idea at all. It just like hand it off to you to be the parent.
Yeah. That's a great way of describing it because when we have to be their main support when it comes to their mental health, we also get 99% of the blame if things don't go the way parents want to see. I've found that working with the family as a whole is providing so much more support for the children. Their parents are now learning how to better support them at home, while the child is also learning how to go through their emotional regulation and their emotional patterns. And I think a big thing is not really knowing the difference between psychotherapy and parent coaching or just like parenting advice. But the difference is with parent coaching, we're not focusing on your child's emotional patterns or their mental health condition. That's what I'm focusing on with the children. With parents, we're focusing on the strategies they can use in that moment to be able to support their child. These strategies could reflect what I'm doing with their child in therapy. They might not, but it's a completely different scope. And I think there's a big inconsistency with just like discipline in general, especially when you're working with neurodivergent kids. But sometimes discipline is necessary. However, not in the same way that you would deal with neurotypical kids. But the idea is just to make sure that all parents, caregivers, everybody on the team is aligned to make sure that there's consistency across the board. That's one of the most important things when dealing with, I think, any child, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, is just consistency.
Yeah, that's why we are so glad, Stacey, you're here today, because when a lot of people think about therapy, they think about the 1 hour, once a week session. And in fact, majority of the work is done outside of the session for the parent with the children 24/7. And Stacey, you talk about the parenting coaching, the psychotherapy, the two things. You also talk about the parenting coaching for neurotypical and neurodivergent uh, children. How about you tell us a little bit about what exactly do you do for parenting coaching for neurotypical individuals first?
Yeah, for sure. So, for both, the goal of parent coaching is to understand behavior as communication and focus more on regulation before discipline. We think that just because sometimes children are neurotypical, that they're able to understand everything that we're saying to them. For example, some parents might think, okay, I say it to you once, listen to me. That is simply not the case because at the end of the day,
Mhm.
they're still kids. Their minds and their bodies are still developing. I see neurotypical kids and they go through very similar patterns of dysregulation or overwhelm because they're kids. So while we're focusing on different topics, we're still focusing on a background and on a grounding of just a very similar framework towards working towards this. Um, so that can include helping kids build more emotional literacy. You're seeing your kid have, let's call it a tantrum, but is it a tantrum? Or are they just feeling too many big emotions at one time? Are they
Mm.
just sad about something that happened? Are they just too excited? At the end of
Mm.
the day, we are still working with children. And I think it's hard for some parents to kind of come to the conclusion that they might need that little bit of extra help because parents are spread so thin. You're working, you're taking your kids to school every day, you're packing lunches, you're doing all of these things. And it takes a lot to raise kids. It really does take a village. So having
Mhm.
somebody on the outside of that, that's not family, that's completely unbiased, be able to come in and help you out, I think is just so valuable.
Wow, Stacy, you mentioned a number of concepts, which is very counterintuitive.
Mhm,
For example, for a lot of parenting about the behavior, even the definition,
mhm,
is really about behavior control. We need to stop this behavior. Almost same as at a workplace, the manager say, we need to stop this. I don't care what you do, stop it tomorrow, that sort of thing.
mhm.
But in a psychology standpoint, the science and research, we actually want to understand what is behind the behavior as a communications.
Mhm.
So it's a totally different way of behavior control and understanding behavior.
Exactly. There's a framework for parent coaching. There's tons of frameworks for parent coaching, but one of them that's really involved with cognitive behavioral therapy is CALM. It's an acronym, so CALM, where the C stands for connect before correct. The whole idea surrounding the CALM framework is because it's a relationship based approach to parent coaching. So when I say connect before correct, we want to focus on the emotional safety of our kids before problem solving. We want to encourage co regulation. We still want to validate their feelings. I think that there's a misconception that just because they're kids, they feel whatever and we don't have to care. But they remember that. Kids are very intuitive. So we want to make sure that we're validating their feelings. We want to understand the attachment that they might have to us as their parents and have the awareness of what's going on. Because as a grown adult, we kind of know an idea of what's going on in our bodies, in our nervous systems. We know where these emotions are coming from. But as
Mm,
kids, they don't know what's going on in their nervous system. They don't know what's going to trigger them in a second and cause these behaviors. We also want to understand what their behavior is trying to communicate to us, whether or not they can verbally communicate, whether they're nonverbal or they're fully speaking. Kids don't have the emotional literacy. They don't have the words to tell us how they're feeling sometimes. And that's where some of these behaviors come from. Some questions you could ask as a parent could be, what does my child need right now? Seeing them go through this behavior,
mm,
what do they need right now? If they're able to tell you themselves, asking them, what do you need right now?
mm.
They don't regulate through logic the way that we do as an adult. And honestly, some adults don't even regulate through logic. They're kids. And we also want to make sure as parents that we are not only responding to the behavior, we want to make sure we're responding to the emotion as well as the behavior.
Okay, wow. So Stacy, here you mentioned about this parenting coaching framework called CALM.
Mhm.
C refers to connect before corrections. And how about the other one, A, L, and M?
So A actually stands for assess the why, because we want to understand why.
Okay.
Why is this behavior happening? Were they
Okay.
triggered? Are we dealing with sensory needs? Are they feeling some sort of
Um,
anxiety? Do they need help with some executive functioning? Do they have a need that's being unmet? I think a great example would be, let's say you're taking your kid on vacation for the first time and you're taking them on an airplane and they're screaming and crying and everybody around you is annoyed and you're also getting annoyed, and then you yell because you snap. In reality, why are they screaming and crying? Are they overstimulated because there's tons of things happening around them? This is their first time on a plane. Are they having anxiety regarding flying? They've never done this before. It's about trying to make sense of it. And the behavior makes more sense when we understand why it's happening. It's definitely not as black and white as it may seem from a neurotypical adult perspective, where we know we act a certain way because we feel a certain way. We're able to verbalize it, we're able to communicate that vocally and do our coping strategies to help regulate ourselves. But when we're dealing with kids, there's only so much that they know how to communicate. And we have to remember that they behave based off of behavior that's modeled for them and the behavior that they constantly see. And I think it's particularly interesting because parents need to sometimes ask themselves where their negative behavior is coming from and whether that negative behavior is coming from a place of defiance or whether it's coming from overwhelm, sensory overload, anxiety, simply just a lack of skill. The question should be, how can I support them with what they need right now? So that's where the A comes from. It's about understanding why this behavior happens. The L, now, lead with boundaries. We can be compassionate while still making sure that we are maintaining structure and routine. They both can exist at the same time. I mentioned that boundaries are important. And the biggest key to leading with boundaries is, again, consistency. Big word there, consistency, and
oh,
and healthy limits. Any kid, I think it's just very interesting to see and I think it's been proven time and time again, whether they're neurodivergent, neurotypical, they do so well with routine. Once you get, let's say, a newborn baby, once you get that baby on a routine, it's like clockwork, right? We're able to predict their behavior based off of routine and past behavior. If you know your child is going to get triggered by being on an airplane, you can now better prepare for the next experience. Um, Sometimes, like boundaries, it's a big word. I talk to all of my clients about boundaries. And sometimes parents, maybe they're open to parent coaching, maybe they're not. But sometimes parents have this mentality of kids need to listen, they need to respect their elders, they're my kids, they need to listen to me, so on, so forth. But the reality is, everybody of every age is entitled to boundaries, whether it's you as an adult or your child, because boundaries will help them feel safe and not controlled. And that makes such a big difference. For example, I have a parent who is dealing with their child with OCD tendencies, and mom didn't realize how much her reassurance cycles were unintentionally maintaining OCD. There was a situation where kiddo was kept going into the closet, and mom asked me, like, should I lock my closet? And my response was, that is absolutely a boundary that you can put in place, because that is, by leaving your closet open, you are unintentionally, again, unintentionally, keyword, in reassuring that cycle versus kind of cutting the cycle off. So boundaries, very important. Then,
Lead with boundaries.
yeah, then we come to M, model emotional skills. I mentioned
Ah.
before that children behave based off of behavior that is modeled for them. So we might not think much of what's going on around us or what kids might see or hear, but kids, again, are very intuitive and they do pick up on that. And it can be negative or positive. So let's make it a positive thing. Children can learn emotional regulation through observation. We want to make sure that we are self regulating just as much as we are practicing our coping skills, that we are able to reflect, repair any relationship that has gone through conflict, because our children are going to learn more from how we handle emotions than what we say to them about them. And that's just the reality of the situation. If your parent is telling you, don't, like, do this, do that, whatever, but then not doing the same thing, or telling you, okay, walk away and breathe, but they're yelling, are you going to listen to them, or are you going to see what they do and kind of model the same behavior? I get just as frustrated sometimes with my kids, with my adults, with my parents, like in a therapy standpoint. And the way that I handle my emotions is with my coping strategies, whether it's taking a moment to breathe deeply, whether it's asking for just a minute of silence to clear my head. My kids are going to see me doing that in our sessions and start to model that behavior. And I've seen it. I've seen my kids ask me, Miss Stacey, can I just have a moment to like think? Yeah, absolutely, you can have that.
Wow, Stacy, this is fascinating to hear about this calm model. Let me just repeat it for the viewer here. Calm. C stands for connect before corrections. A is assess the why. L is lead with boundaries. M is model emotional skills. This is fascinating here, Stacy, because I think this model, even in regular psychotherapy for adults, couple counseling, family counseling, it can come into place.
Absolutely.
Connect before corrections compared to corrections first.
And I think that's why parent coaching is such a valuable service, because I
Ah,
view it quite similarly to relationship therapy, like couples counseling,
ah,
right? Like we're still dealing with at least two different parties. And a lot of this framework revolves around communication.
yeah. And also assessing the why compared to assuming the individual is defiant, oppositional, trying to harm you. That's just the first two is amazing.
I think it's also important to touch on the cultural aspect of it, because
Okay, okay.
sometimes we deal with families and parents that come from different cultures, that come from more westernized cultures or come from more Eastern cultures, where this is not traditional at all. Like parent coaching, let alone therapy. This is not, it's a very stigmatized thing. So being able to connect with parents of different cultures and help them in a very similar way has been very rewarding. It's also interesting because you can help parents out in a sense. Some parents come from cultures where, for example, not saying hello as soon as you walk into the house of somebody's like house, you're a guest, you're not saying hello to all of these like people, you're not giving hugs and kisses and whatever. And I come from a culture where that's considered rude. If your child walks in and they're not giving hugs and kisses to everybody, that's rude, and you will be blamed as a parent for that. And that's just a cultural thing. But in reality, I don't want to be touched. Why would I want my kid to be touched? I have boundaries when it comes to my body. That's just my personal boundary. My kids are allowed to have the exact same boundary. And I always like when my little nieces and nephews walk in, and if I know they don't want a hug or whatever at the time, and their parents are trying to like push them, and I'm like, no, it's okay. They don't have to, because they don't. I get that you come from a culture where that's considered rude, but how would you feel if the situation was flipped? Your kids have probably only seen these people a handful of times, and they have these little memories where they might not remember all of these people or all of these things. So even though, they're meeting their grandparent who they might not have seen since, or they're meeting their grandparent who have not been around them since they were an infant, they're not going to remember their grandparent. They might not feel as comfortable. And I think it's important to give them the space and allow them to have the boundary to warm up themselves instead of forcing them into a situation that's going to make them uncomfortable, that's going to make them dysregulated, and it's just going to be like not great for everybody in that surrounding.
And Stacey, you are mentioning a great point, a very important point. Because every single week, people are coming into couple or family counseling with two parents. They have different cultural background. For example, one parent might be growing up in Canada, one is a relatively newcomers. And that really clash their parental values and cultural values.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, I'm sure you work with a lot of parents like that. They don't share the same values, the same parenting, upbringing, and all that one. Tell us a little bit about it.
It's it's interesting because, sorry, sorry about that. It's interesting because we talk about kind of a mesh of both things. We have to talk through negotiation and compromise. I am definitely a firm believer in have these conversations before you have kids. I
Okay.
definitely have had these conversations with my partner so that when we have kids, we kind of are a little bit more prepared for that. Although you can only prepare yourself so much until baby's already here, right? But it's definitely a measure of what you guys have negotiated amongst each other in terms of what you want your child to follow from culturally. So let's say, for example, um, a woman immigrates from India and she's now living in Canada and she meets a white Canadian boy and they get married, they get together, they have a baby. She might have a different mindset when it comes to parenting, when it comes to values, when it comes to respect in her culture. And he might be on the complete opposite end of that spectrum. It's important, and I think parents don't think too much about it, but not only instilling both types of values in your child from a cultural standpoint, because you don't want to lose your culture, but also thinking about what's best for your child. Let's think realistically. Mom's parents are all the way in India. They have this different cultural expectation. They come to visit. Your child hasn't seen them in months, years, if ever. And you expect them to all of a sudden be super, super close and be completely respectful and spend all of this time with them without giving your child the space to feel how they feel about that situation. And sometimes that causes conflict in a relationship, 100%. But it's also, we go back to modeling behavior. Your child might see you and your partner have that conflict. And that's okay. It's okay for your child to see conflict. The important part is for them to also see the resolution. Because if they don't see the resolution, they're just going through their mind thinking, okay, mom and dad are fighting about whatever, and all they do is fight. They don't see the part where you make up and where you talk things out so that you're in a healthy relationship. It's okay for them to see the conflict. They have to see the resolution. If they're only seeing one or the other, it's not going to reflect well on their upbringing and their behavior moving forward.
And Stacey, from what you're mentioning, going back to the calm, the L and M lead with boundaries, model emotional skills. In that sort of example, when the parents are conflicting all the time, in that case, it will be very difficult for the child. The child will be learning those poor boundaries and also poor emotional regulations and explosion.
100%. So I actually have a family with divorced parents. So that is very, very, very primal when you're dealing with divorced parents. One parent might want all of these things, but the other parent wants the complete opposite. And I think it's more of a relationship challenge than a family challenge because at the end of the day, your child needs to come first. And I think half of my parents understand that. One half of all of these couples, at least one half, understand parent that your child is coming first. But the other half is more so only thinking about their behavior, their kids' behavior, not thinking about their kids' emotions. That's the big thing. They're thinking, I want this behavior to stop. That's it. They're thinking, I want compliance. They're not thinking, where is this coming from? Why is my child acting like this? So definitely really difficult dealing with parents who are like always fighting and like don't want to kind of come together for what's best. But at the end of the day, I do what's best for my kids. And if I have to tell parents that, I'm very firm. I am on particularly my boundaries as well, because mine are just as important. If you guys are going to do this, nothing is going to change at home. Absolutely nothing's going to change. I only get them for an hour a week. You get them for the other 99% of the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, wow.
So we all have to work together for this to work. And I have seen change when we've discussed that. When I have held firm on that boundary, I have seen change. Because then it comes from a realization of this stranger is telling us
Mm.
we need to get our stuff together and focus on our kid.
And to imagine that it is safe to say it can be very difficult. The parents, as you mentioned, they're focusing on changing their child's behavior and not trying to understand the child's behavior. The root cause is themselves.
I
Wow.
think so. Something that we tell just clients in general for therapy is that it is an amazing thing for them to take this step to want to help themselves. And I view parent coaching the exact same way. It's an amazing thing for you to willingly put yourself in this position to want the extra help. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for a little extra help here and there. Absolutely not. And it's the same with therapy, right? Like there sometimes, I mean, there is still a relatively negative stigma regarding therapy. And I don't see that changing, especially in non-Westernized cultures. But at least with like parent coaching, it's very similar. Like some parents are completely not okay with the idea. They think my kid's already in therapy. Why am I going to put myself through parent coaching? Like, I'm a good parent. I don't have to worry about it. This is not about being a good or a bad parent. It's about learning new skills to better support your child. It's about learning new strategies to better support yourself so that you can then support your child. Like, for example, with my OCD kiddo, one of the things that I did for his mom, he doesn't come to therapy. He doesn't agree with therapy. So it's mom that I talk to for parent coaching. And one of the things that I do for mom is I will write up a script for her. So for OCD specifically, like with specifics to their case, I will write up a script for her. So if he says this, you say this, you repeat with this, you do this again until it's dropped, stuff like that. And that's where I think there's a misconception with parent coaching, because I think people think that it's just like somebody telling you what to do or somebody just like trying to judge you or give you parenting advice, but that's not what I'm doing. It's me giving you strategies and giving you all of these tools for you to have in your toolbox so that when you're ready, you're able to use them.
And Stacy, give us an example here. For example, let's say two parents come into parenting coaching, and then one parent refused to come anymore, so you only have one parent left. I'm sure you have encountered this situation.
Mm-hmm. I would first and foremost recommend or ask if they're seeing somebody separate, because I would reference the modeling emotional skills. If
Okay.
your child is like, this is what I'm witnessing. I don't know what your child is witnessing, but this is what I'm witnessing. And if I can see this, I am 90% sure your child can feel this at home. Whatever tension that one parent decided to just walk out and was like, nope, not doing this anymore, I can't do anything about that. But at the end of the day, one still stayed. One stayed because they were willing to put in that extra effort. So in my mind, I at least know that my kiddo's still getting that little bit of extra support at home. They are, but it's a lot of encouragement to the parents to, if there are relationship issues, that should be kept out of your family. That's between you two. If you guys need to see a therapist for that, you guys go and see a therapist for that and do the work for that. Because if you're willing to do this bit of work by allowing your child to come to therapy, putting them in all of these services to be able to get them help, if you're willing to do that, why aren't you willing to do this?
And Stacy, you mentioned this sentence is very powerful. If you, as a therapist, can observe it in 1 hour, you're pretty sure your kid is also can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very powerful statement, and it is true. It's a fact.
Yeah, for sure. We and I see it with just like my own family and my little kids, knowing what's going on with some of my family members and seeing how these kids' behaviors are reflected in that. And I guess a great example would be, okay, your parents just got divorced. Maybe a teenager, maybe you're a little bit younger than that, preteen, whatever. You're in that age range, your parents got divorced, you're seeing all this conflict, and then you start to act out. And your parents in their head are just thinking, oh, they're just acting out because we're getting divorced. No, your kid is acting out because they're seeing all of this behavior modeled for them. No matter how old they are, their brains are not fully developed for them to think logically, they're fighting that doesn't involve me. You see a lot of times in movies and TV shows, because sometimes those do reflect reality. The kid goes on to blame themselves for the divorce because you guys are fighting in front of them.
Yeah. This is a really powerful reminder how this parenting framework they come is very powerful, even for a slogan for people to regulate their own emotions.
Yes. And it was really funny. One of my little kids had said something a while ago. There was a conflict at school between them and their teacher. And when they were like saying it back, they were kind of saying like, but the teacher's grown. Like they should know better than to talk like that to me. And it made me laugh because it's true. Kids may have these, I'm going to call them behaviors. I'm not going to call them tantrums because that's not what they are. We can't define them as a tantrum because we don't know why it's happening. And that's why the why is important again. But we see these kids having these negative behaviors and then an adult also having these negative behaviors. If your teacher at school is showing these negative behaviors and doesn't know how to regulate themselves, that's also behavior that's being modeled for your child.
Oh,
I remember being in third grade and I had the meanest teacher at school. Like he had a reputation for being the meanest teacher at school. And honestly, he was a great teacher. He was a great teacher. But it shows like when he did get angry, he stayed calm. And that was important because even as adults, we can fly off the handle for sure. It happens. And if it does happen, there are steps to rectify that. But if you're going to fly off the handle, let's fly off the handle behind closed doors where nobody can sense what's going on, where we don't have to worry about our child seeing this and then modeling that behavior. And I'm not saying that for just feeling emotions. It's okay to cry in front of your kids. One of the things I absolutely hate is because I still see this behavior. It's like dads or moms telling their kids, specifically sons, you can't cry because you're a boy. I hate that. I
yeah.
absolutely hate that. Your children are allowed to feel emotions.
Mhm.
And they try to model it by saying, like, oh, like dad doesn't cry, or like if you're a man, you don't cry, or whatever, which complete nonsense. Do not agree with that. But if you're constantly telling your kid they're not allowed to cry because they're a boy specifically, what do you think is going to happen when they grow up emotionally repressed because they've never cried a day in their life, or they're afraid to show their emotions to other people because they're afraid they're going to be judged for that?
Wow. And Stacey, when you are going along with this parenting coaching with the two spouses, two partners, two parents, would it be common that you do a little bit of couple counseling too, because of the different emotional regulation skills between the two parents, different boundary skills within the parents, they have to kind of agree, negotiate, and for the kids.
I would honestly say that like that's definitely an aspect of parent coaching is trying to manage both parents when you're dealing with two parents.
Okay.
It's, there was one time I just had a meeting with parents and it was an hour of couples counseling where they were just yelling at each other in front of me.
Yeah.
But it's,
Wow.
yeah, that's part of it. It's also a safe space for the parents to be able to ask their questions and say how they feel without being judged as well, because sometimes you might have tons of parents have questions, especially first time parents. You have
Yeah.
questions about your behavior, about your kids behavior, about your partner's behavior, and it's a place of non-judgment because at the end of the day, we're all here for a common goal, and that is to help your child. So I wouldn't see them separately for couples counseling, specifically
Mhm.
because I see the child and I don't want to get involved in their relationship dynamics for ethical purposes. But I could recommend couples counseling, but I would say that there is an aspect of that to parent coaching just to ensure that
There's
they're
some overlap.
exactly, there is some
Yeah.
overlap. But just to ensure, again, we're all aligned with our goals and we're all continuing to be consistent with behavior at home
Mhm.
as well, like as much as like my kiddos are learning in their sessions.
Mhm. And Stacey, here, one of the also common questions about parenting coaching or even parenting here is, now I'm sure you support parent coaching for a two-parent household,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you also support a single parent. The other parent is absent, disappear, actually no interaction. So, can you tell us a little bit about the added challenge as a single parent, the parenting coaching?
Yeah, for sure. When it's a single parent coaching, especially when you know that you're dealing with divorced parents or like an absent parent, first and foremost, we want to ensure that the parent that we are working with knows that that happening has nothing to do with you. Whatever they like are not there for has nothing to do with you and your parenting in terms of like negative behavior that you're seeing. Because I know I hear a lot of like, I'm just not doing enough. I hear crying from some clients and breakdowns 100% because they feel so bad for their kid either having to go to this household where they're just not seen or their emotions aren't valid, or not even being able to go to this household at all and having a parent that is completely absent. Um, I would also add, so if the parent's absent, it's different than the parent being like still present, but just, I mean, physically present, not emotionally present. But if it's simply just a one parent dynamic in general, I would say it's a little bit easier with parent coaching because I only have to deal with one person. But when it's like a parent that the other spouse is physically there, like they're an every other weekend parent, and kiddo goes to their house and is just completely not seen, not heard. I can honestly say like it breaks my heart. It truly does because I have my sessions with kiddos and when your parent, well, I mean, I don't know, but I think it's a common thing when your parents get divorced, you know, no matter what, you don't really see what's going on until you get older. As you get older, you do see. But when you're still young, you're thinking like both parents are your superheroes. Frankly, sometimes you're even thinking the parent that's in and out is the best parent because they're the fun parent. And the parent that's at home with you all the time, taking care of you and managing you is, they're a buzzkill because they're giving me rules. They're making me do all these things. So it's difficult. It is 100% difficult. And I see the wear and tear on my kids and on my parents, the emotional exhaustion. I am very thankful that I work with parents that are very emotionally aware of their own selves. So dealing with like a family with a divorcee and the parent is very much like, I will never speak badly about my ex-partner in front of them. No matter how I feel, I will never speak badly about them because at the end of the day, that is my child's other parent. So I get that. But then there's the frustration because they don't do anything. They don't do anything. They plop kiddo in front of a TV for the weekend and call it a day. That's
Yeah.
it. So it's frustrating, especially when kiddo comes back to their house. They feel like they're being put on the back burner. They feel like they're not being seen, not being heard. I've heard the term practice family before, Like they think that they were the practice family for that parent's new kids. And truly, like it breaks my heart, like 100%, because obviously as a therapist, we gain this bond to all of our clients. So, oh my gosh, like does that hurt to hear? But knowing that like the other parent is absolutely doing their best and seeing that behavior change is where I know that things are going well. So even though all of these things are happening, the parent gave me an example the other day saying, like, I know this is working because my kiddo had very, very big outbursts of behavioral issues where there was like stomping and like swinging around and lots of physical aggressive behaviors. We have been practicing calming strategies and with the parent encouraging these strategies, validating their emotions in the moment, because you're allowed to feel however you want to feel 100%. It's how we act that we might want to think about a little bit more. So we've implemented so many strategies with the parent, with the kiddo. And then the other day, the parent was telling me, like, I see this working because I noticed that kiddo got triggered. I noticed it. And they were about to start stomping. And then the parent says to them, I noticed you got triggered. Do we want to do one of our calming strategies so that we can, continue on? Stood there for a moment, took some really nice, big, deep breaths, thought about it for another moment, and then was like, okay, I'm okay. Let's proceed. So,
Wow.
yeah.
And Stacy here. Um, let's talk about some of the difficult situation that you just mentioned. One kiddo went to a home with zero boundaries, no rules, junk food, chips, whatever, no chores. And then when they go back to the supposedly good parent with rules, teaching, and maybe even outdoor activities,
Mhm.
they kind of hate it, you know. So when you look at this, what are some of the signs and symptoms you can see for the kiddo, you know?
Mhm. It's sometimes like pent up aggression, whether it's just physical or verbal. Um, Sometimes fighting with siblings in either or both households if there are other siblings.
Yeah.
But I will say it's definitely gotten to a much better place where they have that understanding, where it's like, I go to this house and I feel all these things and I'm allowed to do all these things, but I'm not allowed to have the time or the space to emotionally process what's going on. I don't have that guide, in a sense, at the other household. And coming back, yeah, it's frustrating. I have no rules at this house, but I've got rules at this house. But then seeing the difference in their emotional structure, one house versus the other house. One house, you're not allowed to feel things. You're not validated in what you feel. You just get yelled at. In the other house, you get spoken to. And that's the difference, being yelled at versus spoken to. You're being spoken to like you're a person, not just like you're somebody's child. You're getting spoken to by people who care about you and who want the best for you. And you can see the difference in their emotional regulation and their own boundaries purely by going from one house where regulation is not present and going back to the other house. So, yeah, one house might have more rules, but you can see the benefits of the structure of that house.
In a way here, Stacy, for the kid growing up in this environment, because in some circumstances, their parents, they don't change.
No.
So the kid will be living a separate, two separate opposite life for 18 years. It will be like a mission impossible for that adjustment inside.
Hmm.
Wow.
Hmm. And with kids who don't go to therapy, I think we can see, like, for example, like when I was that age, when I was like in middle school, and we had friends whose parents were getting divorced. And one of my friends, who I'm still friends with now, um, her parents split up. Dad's house was the fun house. She was there every other weekend. She was able to do whatever she wanted at dad's house, eat whatever she wanted at dad's house, always go to her friends at dad's house. When she was at mom's house, we're making sure you do your homework. We're making sure you get whatever little, we're kids, whatever little chores we have done. We're making sure that, we're doing fun things as a family as well. You're gonna like She could not stand her mom for the longest time, but as she grew up and saw the difference between a present and an absent parent, that's when it really, really showed. So it's
Oh, I see.
unfortunate that it took her so long to see that. And I feel for that mom. And I feel for all moms and dads that have to go through that, where they're the present parent, but they don't get the
Yeah.
recognition that they deserve for being the present parent when that's the dynamic. Um, so I definitely feel for her mom in that case. And it sucks that it took her to grow up and get married and have kids to understand that dynamic versus any kids that I work with now, or as they're slowly getting older still, they're doing a lot better managing it because they have access to these services and these supports that
Yes.
me and my friends didn't have access to when we were kids.
Wow, I see. So Stacy here. Today, let's summarize here. You talk about the framework for parenting coaching versus psychotherapy with child. We talk about a lot of logistics here, cultural. There's so much more we talk about here. We definitely have to talk more for a series here. But before we stop here, what is some of the takeaway message you give to the public for parenting coaching?
Mhm. I think the number one thing is knowing that the emotions that we show and the behavior that we show, they see that. Our kids see that. They see that. And if they don't see it, they feel it. I think that's one of my biggest ones. I think the other one is sometimes as parents, they get lost in being a parent and boundaries don't exist. But you're allowed to have boundaries. You're allowed to, as a parent, just as much as your child is allowed to have boundaries, you are allowed to have those boundaries for yourself. I think that's a really, really important one to take away because sometimes it's easy to get walked all over as a parent and it's easy to let it happen because you feel like I'm a parent and I have to, but you don't. You are allowed to have your boundaries. I think another big takeaway that I would like parents to understand, again, just to reiterate, is it's okay for your kids to see conflict, whether that's as a couple or you with your own parent or you with your sibling. But it's just as important for them to see that resolution because they're going to grow up and they're going to have conflicts too with their friends and with their siblings. Um, but it's important for them to see how resolution happens so that they're able to eventually model that behavior as well. I think, and then the last thing is again, just understanding why the behaviors are happening, not just the behaviors, but the emotions and the feelings from them.
Thank you so much here, Stacey. And today, for all the public and fellow clinicians, we'll be putting Stacey's information in the description so you can contact Stacey more for parenting coaching, psychotherapy, and any of your questions here. Once again, thank you so much, Stacey, for all this wonderful education today.
Thank you so much for having me, Joseph. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye, Stacey.
Bye-bye.